My name is Mary Caldwell. I'm 68 years old. I was a school secretary for 34 years, a wife for 40, and a mother longer than I care to count. These days, I suppose I'm just Grandma Mary, or as my daughter-in-law says, Mary, who always knows where the Band-Aids are. That morning, I stood in the doorway of my own home, holding a printed list in one hand and a spare house key in the other. "You're too old to travel with us, Grandma," Jennifer said, with that crisp politeness she wraps around cruelty like a bow on poison. "Just stay and watch the house." Matthew didn't say much. He just loaded the suitcases into the SUV, adjusted the GPS, and nodded like all this made sense. My grandkids, Olivia and Jonah, were too busy laughing about airplane snacks and hotel pools to notice I wasn't packing anything. I smiled, the kind of smile you practice after years of biting your tongue, the kind that doesn't touch your eyes. Then, I waved goodbye as they pulled out of the driveway. My son, his perfect wife, my two noisy, beautiful grandchildren, headed for Spain without me. I stood there in my front yard, still in my cardigan, watching the back of a black Escalade disappear around the corner. Then I stepped back inside. The silence was immediate and heavy. The house felt embarrassed, like it knew. I walked to the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once hosted Thanksgiving for 22 people. I put the list down on the table. It read, water plants every other day. Check mail, take out trash, Thursday morning, lock doors twice at night. There was no thank you, no sorry we're leaving you behind, no we'll miss you. Just instructions. So I made tea, not because I needed it, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. You don't scream at silence. You steep into it. I sat at the kitchen table and tried not to cry. I failed. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was emptied. They said I was too old to come, but not too old to work. Too old for adventure, but not for chores. Too old to join them, but young enough to be useful. I stared out the window and thought, this is what they see me as now. A gatekeeper, a plant waterer, a house sitter with a smile. The next morning, I went to check the mailbox. Mostly junk. Grocery flyers, a newsletter from the library, and a thick white envelope with their travel agent's logo on the front. Curious, I brought it inside. It was unopened. Inside were 4 plane tickets. Madrid. Departure in 3 days. 4 seats together. 2 adults. 2 children. And suddenly I realized they hadn't even brought the tickets. They'd left them behind. My hands shook a little. I turned each ticket over, one by one, looking for a trace of me. There wasn't one. They hadn't forgotten me. They had excluded me. On purpose. I sat down at the table again, the envelope beside my teacup. Steam curled into the quiet. And that's when something in me shifted. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was decision. I reached for the phone, the one on the wall with the long spiral cord, the one I've had since Paul was alive. I dialed the number from the corner of the envelope. The travel agency answered. A young woman picked up. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Hello, this is Sunglobe Travel. How can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to cancel a trip. 4 passengers, Madrid." A pause. "Are you one of the passengers?" "No," I said. "I'm the woman who was told to stay and water the plants." Silence. Then she said, "Okay. One moment, please." I could hear her typing. Could almost hear her confusion. Or pity. I didn't care which. She came back and confirmed the cancellation. I wrote down the reference number with a blue pen. Then I hung up and made more tea. Only this time I added honey because I knew something was going to happen next. Not loud, not cruel, but mine. The next morning I opened the front door to get the newspaper like I always do. The air smelled of damp concrete and garden soil. My slippers made no sound against the porch. The wind was gentle, like it knew not to disturb the kind of silence I was sitting in. I bent down to check the mailbox, not expecting anything important. Just the usual. Grocery coupons, credit card offers, maybe a postcard from Ruth down in Arizona. She always sends one in the spring with a photo of her cactus garden. But today, on top of it all, was a white envelope. Thick, sealed, with a familiar logo in the corner. Sunglobe Travel. At first, I didn't react. I just stood there, staring at it in my hand. My name wasn't on the front. It was addressed to Matthew. Probably a receipt or itinerary. I almost tossed it onto the hallway table, but something told me not to. I brought it into the kitchen and laid it gently next to the butter dish. I boiled water again, made tea out of ritual. One hand on the kettle, the other still clutching the envelope. Only after the kettle whistled did I sit. The chair creaked beneath me like it was waking up from years of passive listening. I opened the envelope carefully, like it might contain something alive. Inside were 4 plane tickets. Madrid, Spain. Departure in 3 days. 2 adults. 2 children. Seats together. I stared at the names. Jennifer Caldwell. Matthew Caldwell. Jonah and Olivia Caldwell. No mention of Mary Caldwell. Not even a 5th seat left empty. They hadn't forgotten me. That was almost easier to forgive. No, they had excluded me, planned it, printed it, paid for it, together, and left me behind like I was wallpaper. I folded the tickets slowly, pressed the crease with the edge of my thumbnail. I thought of the meals I cooked, the birthdays I planned, the fevers I held with cool cloths. I thought of Paul and how he would have said, "Mary, that's not a mistake. That's a choice." He'd be right. He usually was. Even in death, he was my compass. I didn't cry. I was past tears. Instead, I got up and walked to the drawer next to the phone. The one where I keep my emergency contacts, appliance manuals, and receipts going back to 1993. I found the envelope's number again. Dialed. Sunglobe Travel, this is Alyssa speaking. Yes, I'd like to cancel a trip, I said. Can I ask who's calling? I hesitated, then answered softly. My name is Mary Caldwell. I'm calling on behalf of the booking. The family had a change in plans. Do you have the reference number? I gave it to her. She typed for a moment. I could hear it. Soft clicks, then a pause. 4 passengers, Madrid. Departure Thursday, correct? Yes. A beat. Would you like to cancel all passengers? Yes. All of them. Another pause. Can I ask why, ma'am? I could have told her the truth, that they'd left me behind, that I'd smiled and waved while they erased me from the story of their lives. That no one had even asked if I'd wanted to come. But I didn't. Instead, I said, just cancel it, please. Her tone shifted, from cheerful to careful. Of course, I'm processing the cancellation now. I waited, watched the steam rise from my tea. Inhale, exhale. Done. You should receive confirmation by email. Thank you. I hung up. No slamming, no rage, just a click. I sat there a moment longer, then picked up the tickets and walked them to the fireplace, slipped them between the pages of Paul's old travel journal, not to burn them, but to bury them somewhere no one would look. They were never going to be used anyway. Not by me, not by them. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something had turned. Something quiet. Something steady. Something inevitable. I made tea again. It wasn't because I wanted to drink it. It was just something to do. A motion. A sound. A way to convince my hands they still mattered. The kettle hissed, then whistled. I poured slowly, letting the steam rise up and kiss my face. The scent of chamomile used to calm me once. These days, I wasn't sure what it did. Maybe nothing. I brought the cup to the table and sat down alone. No conversation. No clatter of plates. No Paul tapping his spoon against the rim like he always did, even when I asked him not to. Just silence. Again. I stared at the teacup for a while before I touched it. The light coming in through the kitchen window cut across the table, soft and golden. Dust floated through it like slow snow. I thought of all the times I'd sat here before, but never really noticed this light. There used to be noise. Homework questions, grocery lists, church gossip, Olivia asking if her hair looked okay before school, Paul humming as he scrubbed a pan, completely off-key. I was always in the center of it. But never the focus. I was the one who held it all together. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I thought that's what love meant. Holding, supporting, making sure everyone else had a seat even if I didn't sit down myself. And somehow, over time, they stopped noticing I was standing. I blinked slowly. My fingers tightened around the cup. There's a certain ache that builds when you realize you're only needed when things fall apart. That you're not a guest at the table. You're the one who sets it, clears it, and disappears before dessert. They used to call me the glue. Mary handles it. Mary knows where it is. Ask Grandma. Mom will take care of it. They thought I wore that title like a crown. But glue doesn't shine. It hides between the pieces. It disappears when the picture is whole. And now that the picture no longer included me, I was apparently no longer necessary. I took a sip of the tea. It had gone lukewarm. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time someone had asked me what I wanted. Not what I could do. Not what I could cover. Just what I wanted. I couldn't remember. I used to dream of seeing Greece. Not in the touristy way. Just walking through old ruins. Feeling the history beneath my feet. I read about it in Paul's travel books before he got sick. We always said we'd go when we retired. He retired. Then he died. And I retired into a role I never applied for. The reliable afterthought. I opened my eyes and stared into the tea like it might answer me. This wasn't grief anymore. I knew grief. I'd walked through it, folded laundry with it, mowed the lawn with it. Grief is loud, sharp. But this was dull, quiet, a kind of slow erosion that doesn't show until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman who hasn't spoken for herself in decades. I reached across the table and picked up Paul's old mug, still chipped on the rim, still clean. I held it in both hands for a long moment, and for the first time in a long time, I whispered to him, "Paul, what would you have done?" And maybe I imagined it, but I could almost hear him say, "You've done enough holding, Mare. Maybe it's time you let yourself go." I smiled a little, and for the first time since they left, I didn't feel empty, just quiet, but not the same kind of quiet. The kind that comes before a decision. I didn't make a list. I didn't tell anyone. I just moved. I walked upstairs, slowly, not because my body demanded it, but because my heart hadn't quite caught up with what my hands had already decided. In the back of the hallway closet, behind the fall jackets and a dusty humidifier, I found the small fireproof box where we kept important documents. Paul used to joke that it could survive an explosion, but not a flooded basement. We never got around to testing either theory. I opened it with a key that had lived on my keychain for 20 years. There it was, my passport. I hadn't touched it in nearly 3 decades. Last time I used it was for our anniversary cruise to Nova Scotia. Paul had worn a blazer too tight at the shoulders and made friends with the chef because he kept complimenting the shrimp. I still remember the way he winked at me across the dining table as if we were on our first date. I opened the passport gently, still valid. A photo of a younger me stared back. Shorter hair, less gray, a bit more flesh around the cheeks. But the eyes were the same. Tired in a way no sleep ever fixed. I slipped it into my purse. Next, I went into the guest room, the one no one ever stays in, where I kept a small wooden box labeled just in case. Paul used to laugh at me for keeping it, but when he passed, it was the first thing I clutched. Inside, savings bonds, a modest checkbook ledger, and a crisp envelope I'd labeled Mary's Emergency Fund. It wasn't much, $12,000, give or take. A little more if I included the rainy day jar in the kitchen with coins that had outlived their pockets. I held the envelope in both hands and did something I hadn't done in years. I counted only for me. No budgeting for birthday gifts. No grocery calculations. No, what if Jonah needs braces type of thinking. Just me. And it was enough. Not for luxury, but for movement. And that was more than I'd had in a long time. Lastly, I walked to the back of the closet in my bedroom. I had to push past winter coats and a box labeled Christmas lights, maybe broken. Tucked in a garment bag, untouched since the week Paul died, was the navy blue dress. I hadn't worn it since his funeral, not because it reminded me of him, but because it reminded me of who I used to be beside him. It was simple. Long sleeves, clean lines. He always said it made me look like someone important. I unzipped the bag and ran my hand down the fabric, still soft, still sharp, still me. I held it up to my body in the mirror, turned slightly. I didn't look young, but I didn't look invisible either. That was something. I folded it carefully and laid it on the bed. Beside it, I placed the passport, the envelope of cash, a worn paperback about Lisbon that Paul had once picked up from a garage sale. And then I just stood there, breathing, feeling the room change shape around the silence. I wasn't planning a rebellion. I wasn't chasing freedom. I was reclaiming presence. They hadn't asked me if I wanted to come, so I wouldn't ask anyone if I could leave. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be angry. It would be mine. The airplane wheels hit the Lisbon runway with a soft jolt. I didn't flinch. It had been almost 30 years since I'd last landed in a country that didn't have a Walmart, a Target, or a Welcome to Oregon sign. But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I was still. As the plane taxied, I stared out the window. The sky was a soft blush, the kind that felt hand-painted. The rooftops looked sun-washed and tired in a charming way, like they'd spent centuries holding secrets. The other passengers scrambled to unbuckle, open overhead compartments, gather belongings. I didn't rush. I'd waited long enough. 40 years of being useful, available, adaptable. I could wait 3 more minutes in silence. The air that hit my face when I stepped out of the airport was warmer than home. Drier, more alive. I rolled my small suitcase behind me, following signs I couldn't read, but somehow understood. At the taxi stand, I handed the driver the name of the small pension I had booked the night before. No fancy resort, just a modest guest house tucked away in Alfama, the oldest part of the city. I picked it because Paul had once underlined it in his old guidebook, with the words, "For when we're older and don't want noise, just charm." It took me until now to realize I didn't need to be younger to deserve beauty. Charm had waited for me. As we drove, I watched pastel buildings blur into cobbled alleys. Laundry hung like soft flags between windows. Stray cats lounged in sun patches like they owned the stones beneath them. No one here knew me as Mom. No one expected meatloaf or birthday cards or emergency babysitting. I wasn't a role. I wasn't glue. I was just a woman in a navy dress, looking out at a city that had no idea what she'd carried to get here. When the taxi stopped in front of the pension, I hesitated a moment. There were no grand doors, just a blue-tiled wall, worn stone steps, and a brass sign that read, Casa dos Lirios, House of Lilies. I pressed the bell. The door buzzed. I stepped inside. Behind a narrow reception desk stood a young woman with warm eyes and bright red lipstick. She glanced up from her notebook, smiled politely, and said the words that undid something small and quiet inside me. "Ah, Senora Caldwell, welcome. We've been expecting you." Not Grandma, not Mom, not you. She said my name, like it mattered. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. As she handed me the room key and explained breakfast hours, I looked around. A vase of fresh lavender, a painting of boats on the Tejo River. Everything smelled of soap and wood polish. My room was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, but I didn't mind the climb. With every step, I left behind something that didn't belong to me anymore. A story where I was always waiting for permission. A home where my worth depended on being needed. When I opened the door to my room, sunlight flooded in through tall windows. One of them was cracked open. From somewhere nearby, a radio played faint fado music, melancholy, yet strangely hopeful. I sat on the edge of the bed, set my passport on the nightstand, hung up the navy dress, and looked at myself in the mirror above the dresser. No one was watching. No one needed anything. And still, here I was, existing, fully. For the first time in a long time, I whispered, "I'm here, Paul." And in the echo of that quiet Lisbon room, I swear, felt him smile. They called me Senora Caldwell. And somehow, that meant more than all the Mom and Grandma and "can you just help with" I'd ever heard. I opened the wooden door with a soft click. It closed behind me with a kind of gentleness that caught me off guard, like the room had been waiting for me. It wasn't grand, just one bed, a narrow armoire, and a small table with 2 chairs. But the curtains danced slightly in the late afternoon breeze, and the floor was warm from the sun. It felt enough. I didn't sit. I didn't unpack. I just walked to the window. 3 floors down, Lisbon hummed. A man in a white apron swept breadcrumbs from a cafe terrace. Children chased pigeons barefoot. Somewhere, a woman laughed so deeply it sounded like music. I rested my palm against the window frame, chipped with time, and closed my eyes. There was no noise in the room, just my own breath, a clock ticking softly, and the weight of everything. The weight of being the safe place for everyone else. The weight of birthdays remembered, of sacrifices unacknowledged, of casseroles delivered without being thanked. But here, no one expected anything. No one needed anything. And so I allowed myself, just for a moment, to need. Not food, not answers, but a pause, a space. Still standing, I reached into my purse and pulled out a soft bundle. Wrapped carefully, the old handkerchief was faded now, but still carried that distinct scent. Linen, starch, and a whisper of cologne I hadn't smelled in years. Paul's handkerchief. He used to keep it in his suit pocket, folded perfectly, even though he hardly ever used it. He said real gentlemen carried one, not for themselves, but for when someone else cries. I unfolded it slowly, like I was afraid it might fall apart. Inside was what I had tucked into it the day he was buried. A tiny photo strip of us, at a booth in Santa Monica, 1979. I was laughing so hard my eyes were shut in all 3 frames, and a small piece of paper, just one line scribbled by Paul in his familiar looping script. Go see the world when I can't. Promise? I had forgotten, or maybe I had buried it so deep beneath errands and carpool pickups and Thanksgiving turkeys that I stopped hearing it altogether. But now, in a quiet room 3 stories above the tiled hills of Lisbon, I heard it again. Clear, simple, kind. Go see the world when I can't. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the handkerchief in both hands like it might guide me somewhere. I didn't cry. Grief wasn't new. What was new was that I felt seen, not by someone else, but by me. I pressed the fabric to my heart and looked out the window again. No one called. No one texted. No one demanded to know where the groceries were or why the dishwasher hadn't been run. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of that silence. I welcomed it. Because in that silence, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't too old. I wasn't left behind. I was exactly where I chose to be, with Paul's promise in my lap, and a whole city below me, unaware they'd just met a woman who had finally remembered she exists. I folded the handkerchief again, carefully, and placed it back in my purse, not as a relic, but as a compass. Tomorrow, I'd walk the old streets. I'd get lost on purpose. I'd try a pastry I couldn't pronounce. I'd say yes to something unexpected, because Senora Caldwell had finally arrived. Breakfast was served in a sun-lit corner room at the back of the pension, the kind of room where light makes everything softer, where the butter looks gold, and the air smells like orange marmalade and strong coffee. I had barely sipped my tea when I noticed her. A woman, perhaps in her early 70s, sat confidently near the window, back straight, a paperback novel in one hand and a fork of something flaky and sugar-dusted in the other. But it wasn't the book or the pastry that made me notice her. It was the lipstick, bright, unapologetic red. The kind of red that says, I didn't come here to disappear. She glanced up, caught me looking, and smiled. Not the small, polite smile I was used to offering people on sidewalks or at the grocery store. No, this was the kind of smile that reached the eyes. The kind that said, I see you too. American? She asked, her accent unmistakably Southern, somewhere between Georgia and Gumbo. I nodded. Oregon. She gestured to the chair across from her. Well then, Oregon, sit with Louisiana. I hate eating alone. Something about her confidence made it impossible to say no. I sat. Beatrice Langley, she said, offering her hand. Her nails were painted to match her lipstick. Widowed 10 years, retired nurse. I play terrible bridge and excellent piano. You? I blinked. Mary Caldwell. Recently. Reintroduced to myself. She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that filled a room without needing permission. We spent the next 40 minutes talking like old friends who'd simply been paused in time. She told me about her late husband, Marcus, who once painted her toenails when she broke her hip, about how she'd promised herself that if she made it to 70 with her wits intact, she'd travel alone, because she had earned the right to eat croissants in Paris without needing an excuse. I told her little things, safe things, that I was a mother, a grandmother, that I used to garden, that I had arrived in Lisbon on a whim, wearing a dress that used to be for funerals, but now felt like armor. She studied me for a moment and said, "You've got the eyes of someone who's been used to holding everyone else together." I know that look. I had it. Then one day I realized, what if no one holds me together? Who'll be left? I didn't respond, but something in me leaned closer to her than my body did. Beatrice wasn't just wearing lipstick. She was wearing freedom and resilience, and a kind of joy that had nothing to prove. Before she left the table, she placed her fork down, wiped her mouth delicately, and said, "Walk with me later. Alfama's better when you're lost with company." I smiled. "I'd like that." She winked. "We're not too old for anything, Mary. We've just been too polite to remind the world." And with that, she stood up, red lipstick still flawless, and walked out of the room like a woman who didn't need to explain where she was going. I sat there a moment longer, stirring tea that had gone cold. But my heart felt warmer than it had in years, because sometimes healing doesn't arrive with trumpets or revelations. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a stranger in red lipstick, handing you back your name, with a fork and a smile. The cobblestones of Alfama were uneven, but somehow they matched my pace. Beatrice walked just ahead of me, not because she was in a hurry, but because she moved like someone who'd long stopped asking permission, from her body, from time, from life itself. The sun filtered through terracotta roofs, casting shadows that shifted every few steps. Lisbon smelled like grilled sardines and citrus blossoms. It was foreign and yet oddly familiar, like the version of myself I used to know before everyone needed something from me. We paused by a tile wall covered in blue swirls. Beatrice took a sip from her water bottle, looked at me sideways, and said it, softly, but with precision. "You look like a woman who stayed too long." I froze, not from offense, but because the truth sometimes slips into the air so gently, it knocks the breath right out of you. She didn't mean it unkindly. There was no judgment in her voice, just observation, like a nurse noticing a slow pulse. I blinked. "Too long? Where?" She shrugged. "In places that stopped feeding your spirit. In conversations where your voice was only background music. In homes that became museums of who you used to be." I said nothing. Not because I disagreed, but because I knew exactly what she meant. I had stayed. In the kitchen, stirring soups for a family that forgot to ask if I liked the seasoning. In the silence, biting back opinions to keep the peace. In the role of dependable matriarch, even when my own knees begged for rest. Beatrice didn't press. She just kept walking, her red lipstick still intact, her silence more powerful than any advice. A few streets later, we passed a narrow alley where a man played the violin. The melody was raw, imperfect, and beautiful because of it. Beatrice turned to me suddenly. "You ever laugh for you, Mary? I mean really laugh. Not the kind you give your grandkids so they think grandma's fine." I opened my mouth, closed it. And then I laughed. Not a giggle, not a polite chuckle, but a warm, real sound that came from somewhere deep inside, like dust shaking off a forgotten attic. It startled even me. Beatrice grinned. There she is. There was no performance in that moment, no audience to impress, no children to reassure. Just two older women, a Lisbon alley, a violin, and the soft knowing that life wasn't over, just quietly beginning again. We sat on a nearby bench. A cat brushed against my ankle, unbothered by the world. Beatrice pulled out a small mirror and reapplied her lipstick with the precision of someone honoring herself. I watched her, not out of envy, but recognition. "I don't know who I am without everyone else's needs," I whispered. She didn't flinch. She just capped her lipstick and said, "Then it's time to find out." And somehow, for the first time in what felt like forever, that didn't scare me. It felt like an invitation, the kind written without ink, but signed with breath. My phone buzzed during breakfast. I hadn't heard from Matthew in days, not since they left me in charge of the house, with that offhand remark that still echoed somewhere behind my ribs. "Just watch the house, Mom." "No, thank you." "No, we wish you were coming too." Just the casual dismissal wrapped in a smile. I turned the phone over slowly. One new message. "Matthew, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" The tone pierced through the screen. Short, clipped, impatient. There was no hello, no concern, only command. Like I had broken some silent contract of obedience. I stared at the message. The little blinking dots appeared. He was typing again, then disappeared. And I said nothing. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because silence, I've learned, is not always a wound. Sometimes it's a way back to oneself. I folded the phone face down and returned to my tea. Warm, slightly bitter, grounding. Beatrice noticed the flicker in my eyes, but didn't ask. She was good that way, wise enough to sense when words would only dilute the truth. My thoughts drifted, not to anger, but to recognition. Matthew was used to me being available to babysit, available to cook, available to say yes before the question was even fully formed. And now I was unavailable. Geographically, emotionally, spiritually, and that terrified him more than he knew. For a moment, I heard my own voice echo back to me, not the one I used to speak to others, but the one buried under layers of roles and expectations. This silence isn't anger. It's the first space I've had in years to hear my own thoughts. I reached into my purse and pulled out the handkerchief again, the one Elliot had always carried in his coat. Soft, faded, blue with tiny white birds. I pressed it to my cheek, not because I was crying, but because it reminded me of quiet strength, of a love that had never needed to shout to be known. Matthew texted again. "Matthew, did something happen? Are you okay?" That question, finally. Still, I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I was in the middle of a moment, and it didn't include being yanked back by duty. It included birdsong outside my window, the rustle of linen curtains in a Lisbon breeze, and the quiet thrum of a woman remembering she existed long before she was someone's mother. Beatrice finally broke the silence, spoon tapping her saucer. "Let me guess," she said without looking up. "He noticed you've gone missing." From his script. I smiled softly. "It's not revenge," I whispered. "No," she said. "It's remembering." And that's exactly what it was. Not rebellion, not defiance, but remembrance of who I was, before the house, before the labels, before I became invisible in plain sight. And this silence, it wasn't noise to him, it was new, and perhaps unsettling. But to me, it sounded like peace. The bar was tucked away behind yellow walls and ironwork vines, one of those places you wouldn't know to look for unless someone took your hand and said, "Trust me." Beatrice did just that. Live music, no tourists. She winked. I hesitated at the threshold. The place hummed with conversation in Portuguese. Glasses clinked, and a saxophone murmured like it had secrets to share. Inside, it smelled of red wine and old wood. There were no chandeliers, no menus with translations, just people, real people, moving to music like they were made of it. We took a small table near the back. The band was setting up. 3 men, 1 woman, all dressed simply, but their posture told you they belonged to rhythm. Beatrice ordered something with orange slices floating in it. I asked for tea. She smiled. You can change your drink later, but first, change your shoes. I looked down. Old flats. Safe. Predictable. Like everything else I'd chosen, to not be seen. Before I could protest, she slid a small pair of sandals across the table. My size. I saw them in a stall earlier, she said casually. They looked like they were waiting for a woman ready to leave the porch. I laughed, quietly at first. Then louder, the kind that rises without apology. I slipped them on. The music started, something slow, rich, dripping with brass and longing. Beatrice was on her feet before the first chorus. Not asking, not waiting, just being. She extended a hand toward me. Come on, Mary. No one knows your name here. No one's watching. That sentence struck something in me, because for so long I'd been known, only by roles. Mom, Grandma, Mrs. Caldwell. Not Mary. Never just Mary. And suddenly, that's all I wanted to be. I stood, wobbly at first, unsure of what to do with a body that had long only moved out of obligation, cleaning, lifting, soothing others. But the music was forgiving. The floor beneath us didn't ask for steps, only honesty. So I moved. Not like a dancer, but like someone remembering she had knees, hips, a spine that curved for her own joy. I didn't care if I looked foolish. There was no one to impress, no family to explain myself to, no mirror reflecting duty. Just a woman with silver hair and soft wrists, swaying to a rhythm older than regret. A young man passed by, smiling. Not flirtatious, just acknowledging. And for once, I didn't shrink. I nodded. I stayed in the moment. When the song slowed, I found myself laughing again. Sweaty, breathless, but light. Beatrice returned with 2 drinks. She handed me the one with oranges. I sipped it. Too sweet, too cold, too perfect. I didn't care. I drank it anyway. I didn't know I was allowed to dance without being invited, I murmured. Beatrice tapped her glass to mine. You always were. You just forgot the music was playing for you too. And there it was. Not a grand revelation. Not a dramatic transformation. Just a truth so simple it broke something open inside me. I'd been waiting to be chosen, when all along the dance floor was never closed, just unvisited. Until now. It was nearly midnight in Lisbon. The square had quieted. Only the low hum of mopeds and the clink of closing cafe chairs remained. Beatrice had gone up to her room after dinner, humming an old jazz tune. I stayed back, sitting under a wrought iron lamp on a bench that smelled of salt and eucalyptus. I checked my phone one last time, not expecting anything. And yet, there it was, a voice memo. From Amelia, my granddaughter. I blinked. She never sends voice notes, always texts, usually just stickers or one-word answers. My thumb hovered. Then, I pressed play. Hi, Grandma. It's late there, right? Sorry if I wake you. Her voice was softer than usual. Unsure. I saw Mom's story. I guess you didn't go with them. She said you were too tired to travel, but I knew that wasn't true. She paused. I think you're just tired of being left behind. And that undid me. I wasn't expecting tears. I had trained myself to absorb loneliness like weather. a passing season, a cold front, something to endure, not name. But in that moment, on that Lisbon bench, something cracked, and not from pain, from being seen. Tears spilled in silence, not bitter, not wounded, just real. I miss you, she went on, and I'm sorry for not calling more. I think I got used to everyone expecting you to be okay with everything. Like, you're the strong one, so we forgot to check in. I closed my eyes. That phrase, the strong one. Yes, always that. The one who held the umbrella, who poured the tea, who made sure others had what they needed, even when I was drowning dry. She continued, "You used to braid my hair and say, 'Soft hands make soft hearts.' I never forgot that." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The handkerchief in my lap, Elliot's old one, was damp now. Amelia's voice, now quieter, added, "I don't know what you're doing in Portugal, but I hope you're doing something for you. Not for them, not even for me, just for Mary." She said my name, not Grandma, not Mom, not her, just Mary. And I felt it, in my chest, like someone had opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was mine. "I love you, Grandma. Just wanted to say that." The recording ended, but something didn't. Something in me restarted. Amelia didn't know what she'd done, how she'd pierced through years of muffled existence with just a few words, how she, with all her youth and uncertainty, had named the truth no one else dared say, that sometimes the worst pain isn't being rejected, it's being silently expected to accept it. I looked up. The moon was low. The city exhaled around me, and I smiled. Because somewhere across the ocean, a girl with my eyes and my steadiness had whispered something I didn't even know I needed to hear. I whispered back, to no one and everyone at once, "Thank you for seeing me." Then I stood up and walked back to the hotel. Not faster, not lighter, but straighter. The next morning, the Lisbon sky was a pale gray, soft like an old bedsheet. I found a quiet corner cafe, ordered a cinnamon pastry and mint tea, and pulled out a postcard from the gift shop I'd visited the night before. It had a painting of a yellow tram climbing a hill, its windows open, catching the wind. I stared at the blank space on the back. No lines, no limits, just room. I thought about Amelia's voice the night before, how it had touched something I thought I'd buried. And before I could second-guess myself, I began to write. "Dear Amelia, I'm walking. I'm seeing. I'm breathing for me now. This isn't a vacation. This is a beginning." My pen moved slowly. You were right. I wasn't tired. I was tired of being left behind. There's a difference. So I'm going now, not away, just forward. I paused, staring at the space under my signature line. There was more to say, but I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to justify. So I ended it simply. Love, Grandma P.S. I didn't ask anyone's permission this time. I read it again, then smiled. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true. I placed the postcard into my bag, planning to mail it later, but only that one. No postcards for Matthew, no updates, no passive invitations to question my choices. Not this time. Instead, I pulled out my little brown notebook, one I'd carried for years, mostly unused. Elliot had bought it for me the Christmas before he passed, said it was time I started writing things for myself. The first page had always been blank, like I hadn't known how to begin, but now I did. I turned to the second page, uncapped my pen, and wrote, "I no longer wait for permission to live." Then underlined it twice. No flourish, no drama. just that one. Steady truth. Because the truth is, I'd spent a lifetime editing myself, asking silently, is it okay if before every little joy, every moment of rest, every bit of space I claimed for myself? Now I was simply doing. A soft breeze carried the smell of baked bread and sea salt. My tea had gone cold, but my hands were warm. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 11 times. I looked up. The city didn't know I had just crossed a threshold, but I did. This wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't about proving anything to Matthew or even Amelia. It was about coming home. To a part of myself I had abandoned so long ago. I forgot it had a name. Mary. Not mom, not grandma, not caretaker, not house sitter. Just Mary. I tucked the postcard into my coat pocket. Not mailed yet. Maybe I'd add a sketch later, or just sit with it a little longer. Sometimes healing doesn't come in loud declarations. Sometimes it fits on the back of a postcard. Sometimes it's just 5 words in a notebook. I no longer wait for permission. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. My phone buzzed while I was folding a scarf at the foot of the bed. A simple cotton scarf, striped in navy and almond. It had belonged to Elliot. I still brought it along like a quiet witness to all the days that came after him. The message came through just as I was smoothing the fabric. Are you trying to punish us? From Matthew. No greeting, no context, just that. Sharp, cold, defensive. I stared at the screen, and I swear it felt like the words weren't even meant for me. As if I had become a problem to manage, a mother gone rogue, a disruption to their comfort, an inconvenience that suddenly had autonomy. You think I'm punishing you? I whispered that part aloud. Then something deeper stirred in my chest. Not anger, not guilt. Something older, like an ache I'd ignored for too long, finally asking to be heard. Beatrice was sitting at the tiny breakfast table in our guest house room, flipping through a local magazine. She didn't even look up when she said, almost like she'd read my thoughts, "They're not sad because you're gone, Mary. They're sad because they've lost the role you filled, not the woman you are." That silenced me. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified. I set the phone down, screen still lit, and walked over to the window. Outside, laundry lines swayed gently between pastel-painted balconies. A little boy on a scooter zipped past his grandmother, who laughed and called something after him in Portuguese. They were ordinary, but they were together. And here I was, far from home, unexpectedly whole. I thought about replying, typing out something polite, something soft to smooth the edges of his discomfort. But I didn't. Because silence, sometimes, is the loudest boundary we can draw. I sat down, poured myself and Beatrice each a cup of the herbal tea she liked, and finally said, "I think I used to confuse being needed with being loved." Beatrice nodded slowly. "That's not your fault. They taught you that. Maybe I taught them too," I admitted. We sat for a moment. 2 women on the far side of 70. 2 lives of quiet yeses. 2 cups of tea going lukewarm on a Lisbon morning. Beatrice looked at me and smiled. Not kindly, not pitying, just real. "But now you're teaching them something else, Mary. You're showing them who you are when you're not bending." Her words didn't feel like praise. They felt like a mirror. I took a breath, reached for my notebook again, and wrote a single sentence. "I do not exist to cushion their discomfort." I didn't reply to Matthew, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I no longer felt obligated to explain my every step just to soothe his confusion. He was an adult now, with a family of his own, and I was a person, not a placeholder. There's a difference between walking away to punish and walking away to remember yourself. I had chosen the latter, and that was the lesson, whether he saw it or not. I booked the flight back, not because I missed them, not because I felt guilty, but because I was ready to return to my life, on my terms. Beatrice and I had breakfast together one last time in the corner cafe with the crooked salt shakers and warm custard tarts. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're not going back as the woman who left. Make sure you remember that." I nodded, but deep down, I had already made that decision. Back in the room, I took my time folding things. Every movement was deliberate. I wrapped the navy dress, the one I had worn to Elliot's funeral and then to dance in Lisbon, gently into my suitcase. It no longer smelled like loss. It smelled like sweat, citrus soap, and the faint lavender of the guest house linens. I looked over at the windowsill, where the scarf Elliot once wore had rested the entire trip. I picked it up, smoothed it with both hands. Then, without hesitation, I folded it once, twice, and tucked it into the side pocket of my purse. It was no longer a shrine. It was a companion. Next to it, I placed a postcard, the last one, to Amelia. "Sweetheart, I've seen 7 cities. I've eaten anchovies on a rooftop and walked through a thunderstorm without running. I didn't ask permission once. I'll be home soon, but not to be anyone's shadow. Love, Grandma." I sealed it, pressed the stamp firmly, and smiled. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing back to fill a role. I wasn't packing with guilt or hoping someone would notice the gesture. I was simply going home, not to rewind, but to redefine. I tied my shoes slowly, looked into the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't new. She was just finally unhidden. As I zipped the suitcase, my phone buzzed again. "Matthew, let me know when you land." No apology, no question. But I saw something else in it. A shift. Not much, but enough. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my journal and scribbled down one more thing. I am not returning to be your mother. I am returning to be me, and you are welcome to meet her. I closed the book. The sun hit the tile floor just right, casting long stripes like the scarf in my bag. I stood in the light for a moment, letting it warm my feet, my hands, my chest. Then I took one last breath in Lisbon air, turned the key to the room, and left. The taxi pulled up in front of my house just before sunset. The garden was overgrown. The mailbox leaned a little more than before, but everything else looked exactly as I had left it. Still, quiet, familiar. Except, there she was, sitting on the front step, hugging her knees to her chest. Amelia. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, face bare, no phone in her hand. She stood when she saw me, didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked forward, and wrapped both arms around me like a daughter who hadn't known how much she missed her mother until that very second. We stood there, the suitcase still on the curb. Neither of us said a word, and for once, silence wasn't cold. It was full. Her breath caught before she spoke. "I didn't think you'd come back." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "I almost didn't." She looked up. "Was it good?" I nodded. Not all of it. Some of it was lonely. Some of it shook me. But most of it felt like finally learning how to exhale. She smiled, but her eyes welled up. "I listen to your postcard every night." I laughed softly. You mean read? She shook her head. No, I recorded myself reading it out loud. It felt like you were talking to me. I blinked. My voice, through hers. A loop of healing neither of us expected. I reached for the keys in my pocket, opened the door, and waved her inside. No explanations, no justifications. Just space. The house was dim, untouched, but it wasn't sad. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 mugs, 2 tea bags. No rush. I poured the water, then sat down across from her. And then, for the first time in my life, I told my granddaughter who I really was. Not just the birthday card grandma, not the background extra in family holidays, but Mary Caldwell, the girl who wanted to be a travel photographer before life asked her to be someone's wife. The woman who stood in grocery lines calculating every cent because her son needed braces. The widow who cried alone at the funeral so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The grandmother who waited at airports in vain. The woman who danced in Lisbon under a string of lights, wearing the same dress she wore to her husband's goodbye. I didn't apologize. Not for the silence, not for the trip, not for choosing myself. Amelia didn't interrupt. She just listened, eyes wide, chin quivering. At one point, she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. I always thought you were the quiet one, she whispered. But maybe you were just never asked. I exhaled. That right there. That was the sentence I had waited 68 years to hear. And it didn't come from a son. It came from someone who watched me, not used me, who saw me, not the job I did for her. I stood, walked over to the drawer near the stove, and pulled out a tiny linen square. The handkerchief, still folded, still carrying Lisbon's son. I handed it to her. Keep it, I said, but only if you promise to never stay somewhere too long. Amelia smiled, and this time I knew she understood. Not just the story, but the lesson inside it. The soft justice I had chosen. The quiet way I had drawn a boundary, then built a home within it. And right then, with nothing grand or dramatic, a new chapter began. The invitation didn't come. It never does. But I showed up anyway, not out of pride, not out of vengeance, just clarity. Matthew and his family were hosting a welcome back dinner. Correction, Matthew and Carla, his wife, were. The email came from Amelia. No official invite. Just a, Grandma, they're doing a dinner. You should come if you want to. And I did. Not because I wanted back in, but because I needed to see if I could walk through that door and not become invisible again. The house was just as I remembered, decorated with catalog perfection, laughter echoing from the living room. But I didn't knock. I walked in like someone who belonged, even if she no longer fit. Matthew looked up first, froze mid-conversation. Mom? I smiled, calm, steady. Good evening, Matthew. Then turned to Carla. Carla. She blinked fast. We weren't sure if you'd be joining us. I hung up my coat on the rack by the door. It's okay. I was sure enough for all of us. Silence. It wasn't hostile, just off balance. Like the dynamic had shifted a few inches left and no one knew how to realign. The table was set for 10, no name cards. I chose a seat, not at the far end, not near the kitchen, but one seat left of center, facing the garden window, the best light, the clearest view. Beatrice once told me, if they don't save you a seat, build your own and make it worth noticing. Matthew stood at the head, Carla at the other. I noticed she flinched when I unfolded my napkin, as if unsure whether to be offended or impressed. Dinner started. Conversations about Amelia's classes, Ethan's soccer games, Carla's new wellness coaching business. No one asked about my trip, so I didn't offer. Until midway through the meal, Matthew said, "So, did you enjoy your little vacation?" I sipped my water, paused, let the silence stretch just long enough. "I didn't go on vacation, Matthew. I went on a pilgrimage." That word, pilgrimage, it shifted something. "And what exactly were you seeking, Mom?" he asked, voice tinged with challenge. I met his eyes. A seat at my own table. Turns out, I didn't need permission to build it. Carla coughed. Amelia dropped her fork. I continued, soft but unshakable. "You see, you didn't invite me here tonight. That's fine. I didn't come to be invited. I came to be present. There's a difference." Matthew's mouth opened, then closed. I didn't press. I folded my napkin, looked around the table. You all assumed I was too old to keep up, that I should just watch the house, water the plants, stay put, because maybe that's easier for you. Pause. But I wasn't too old. I was just never asked if I still had dreams. There it was, the line, the truth, and the soft thud of realization when it hit. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm awake." I stood, smoothed my dress, the same navy one I had worn in Lisbon, the one Elliot once said made me look like I remembered how to breathe. "Thank you for dinner." I turned to Amelia. "Let me know next time you build something new. I'll bring a chair." Then I walked out. Not storming, not grandstanding, just moving forward. Feet steady, back tall, because sometimes the loudest revolution is showing up. Not to fit in, but to take your place, with no apologies. And as I stepped into the night air, I whispered to myself, I was never too old. I was just never asked if I still dreamed.